As the deer panteth for the water, so my soul longs after thee. You alone are my heart's desire, and I long to worship thee. You alone are my strength, my shield. To you alone may my spirit yield. You alone are my heart's desire, and I long to worship thee.
Hello friends, again we come together. Yes, in the last session, we were trying to analyze the life and achievements of Solomon, the great king of Israel. When we read through chapter 11, we find some of the reasons why Solomon declined in royal power. He inherited a great territory with all the gold and silver, or also the various means of income, annual tributes. All these things were there. But in spite of all this, what happens? Solomon happens to be a failure. And the major reasons that can be attributed against Solomon are these. One, his marriage of foreign women against the commandment of God. This we analyzed yesterday. And because of that, Solomon had to build temples for foreign gods in the city of Jerusalem itself. And this is one main reason, or the spiritual reason for decline. And he began to worship them, the foreign gods. Of course, he worshipped Yahweh also. But this kind of religious syncretism was not tolerated. And hence, Solomon himself paved way for his decline. And then there is a second reason, and that is his building activity, his construction of the palaces and other needed things practically exhausted the wealth of the nation. He began to impose heavy taxes, and thus the situation goes on. And thus we see, practically, when he is there, it is so difficult for him to find out the means for further construction. And as all the other kings do, Solomon also imposed heavy taxes. And when heavy taxes were not sufficient, he imposed bonded labor or slave labor. When that also was not sufficient, we see Solomon went on to make his own people slaves. And even here, Solomon did something wrong. And that would mean he spared his people, that is the Judahites, the people of his own tribe, from slavery. And this ignited an anger and also a revolt against Judahites by other tribes. And this revolt was led by Jeroboam. he was practically an official of Solomon himself. And Jeroboam, son of Nebat, he took up the cause of the 10 tribes. And there was, as we mentioned yesterday, a civil war situation. Solomon was able to contain the war, but of course we know much of the wealth was exhausted. Solomon became weak in power, and this internal revolt or internal disorganization led the country to decline. And besides, as we saw yesterday, many other countries, they stopped paying tribute to Solomon because they understood Solomon is weak. And even if they stop paying the tribute, Solomon is not going to come and attack them. Hence, they stopped paying the tribute, and some countries they declared independence too. They will not remain the vassal kings of Solomon anymore. And thus we find always there is this big problem, the internal tension and the external tension. And because of this, we can say Solomon was not able to do much in his old age. And now comes the punishment of God on him. God said to him, okay, I'm going to divide your kingdom and I will give 10 tribes to your enemy or to your neighbor, and he will rule over them. Only one tribe will remain with you, and that is Judah. But at the same time, we know there is also the tribe of Levi, and they are associated with the temple of Jerusalem, and hence all the Levites, they also supported Solomon or were with him, we can say. And hence there are two tribes, practically speaking, with Solomon, and others are practically going away from him. That is the situation. But when Solomon was able to contain the revolt, at least for the time being, everything came under his control. But then it was time for him to die, and we read towards the end of chapter 11, Solomon died and he was buried with his ancestors. And therefore we can say Solomon's reign was very well done, or it was so precious, so glorious in the beginning, because he was guided by the divine wisdom. But later, he allowed the human wisdom to take control of his life more than the divine wisdom. And that is the reason why it is interpreted in this way. He married many women from different countries. And the reason is often said like this: if he marries somebody from a kingdom, naturally they will not come to attack him for his own political gain, in other words, we can say. Anyhow, he went too far, and that is why so many wives and so on were there. And there are also other people who would say, because of his lust, he entered into so many marriages and so on. Okay, whatever be, there may be some exaggerations here. Still, we can see Solomon went beyond the will of God, and that caused his downfall. And that's what we can understand. Thus, Solomon, who began in a glorious note, ends up in a note of decline, just the opposite of what he began with. And that is the situation, or that is the real background of the nation Israel at the end of his rule. And now we go to chapter 12. And in chapter 12, we find practically the division of the kingdom. And we know when the kingdom is getting divided, there's a reason for that. God wanted to punish David for his sins, and the punishment is the division of the kingdom. And when he tried to go on, at this time we find Solomon's death occurs, and his son Rehoboam comes to the throne. Rehoboam was an able man, but at the same time, he had his own priorities. And this will be evidently seen in his actions. When he became the king, Jeroboam and the people of the northern tribes, or the 10 tribes, they came to Rehoboam, son of Solomon, and asked him to reduce the taxes. Since there are no more construction works going on, everything is finished, and now there is nothing new to begin, and hence the taxes can be reduced. And Rehoboam, he consulted the elderly counselors of Solomon, and they unitedly said, now you can indeed reduce the taxes because it is not needed. And if he reduces the tax, normally speaking, the people will begin to like him and will remain obedient to him. Otherwise, they may be revolting. And Rehoboam said, let me think over it. And he asked his own friends, the young chaps, who also served as the new counselors. And when he was consulting them, they gave him another piece of advice, which was never terrible. And they said to him like this, if you hear their voice and reduce the tax, they will think you are a weak man. You should never give such an image for the people now, especially as you are just beginning to rule. You should show yourself to be a very strict one, and also one who will do anything to make the people obey what you say. And therefore, this idea to assert himself in front of the people, that struck him. And therefore, he practically received this piece of advice from his young consultors, and overruling or disregarding the counsel given by the elderly consultors of Solomon, he called together the people of 10 tribes and then said to them, I am not going to reduce the taxes. I will be double strong and exacting than my father. And therefore, don't think I will give you any exemption, any leniency. And this really irritated and angered the people of 10 tribes. All the leaders were gathered there, and Jeroboam took the initiative, and then he said, let all the tribes of the north, the 10 tribes, return to their own area. And thus began the revolt again. And Jeroboam declared himself to be the king of Israel. Of course, Yahweh had planned it in that way. And when Jeroboam became the king, Yahweh said to him, if you and your descendants follow me and observe my commandments and statutes without going away from it, I will also make you grow, and your descendants will rule over Israel. But if you go away from my commandments, then I will discard you. Therefore, the beginning days of Jeroboam was something acceptable and according to the plan of God. But in chapter 12 we see, the one nation becomes two. Israel becomes Judah, the southern kingdom, and Israel, the northern kingdom. With Israel, there are 10 tribes. With Judah, only one tribe. But together with the Levites, 2 tribes we can say. Thus, the total division took place. And Rehoboam is the king of Judah, the southern kingdom, and Jeroboam, the king of the northern kingdom. This is the situation at the beginning of the divided monarchy or divided kingdom, we can say. And in this background, now we are to analyze the lifestyle of the northern kingdom and the lifestyle of the southern kingdom. Okay. Now, Jeroboam, he practically began to rule Israel. And when he began to rule, we find he was not able to do things as he expected, because the people of his tribes, they continued to go to Jerusalem. And when they continued to go to Jerusalem, what happens is this. The people, they were thinking very positively about the temple of Jerusalem. And as they used to do in early years, now also they want to go to Jerusalem. Because at least once in a year, all the pious Jews who could make it, they would go to Jerusalem to offer sacrifices for the Lord. That was the pious custom. And hence, the people wanted to go to Jerusalem. But there was a danger here. And Jeroboam became very aware of this danger. And what is the danger, we may ask? If the people go to Jerusalem, we know Jerusalem is always a great city, and all the Jews, they have an appreciation and also great esteem for this great city of David. And the king Rehoboam is the grandson of David. And therefore, if the people continue to go to Jerusalem, those who go to Jerusalem will think positively about David and also Rehoboam and about Jerusalem. And if the people think positively about Jerusalem, then naturally they may begin to disregard Jeroboam, and they will have better esteem for Jerusalem rather than Jeroboam and his works. And Jeroboam foresaw these things. And therefore, he devised a plan. He wanted to stop the people from going to Jerusalem. And that is what he did. And why the people go to Jerusalem? Because there is the temple. And it is a place of the presence of God. And also a place where people can worship God, offer sacrifices to Him. And it is because of these things that they go to Jerusalem. But Jeroboam began to think in this way. I am to stop the people from going to Jerusalem. Then only they will develop a kind of allegiance and esteem for me or for the kingdom. And hence, the first thing is to set up a rival temple. And probably he thought in this way. If a temple is built in the geographical center of the northern kingdom, it will be away from the boundary, southern boundary of the kingdom. And then the people living nearby the southern boundary of the kingdom will think that Jerusalem is very close to the boundary in the southern kingdom. And therefore the people may think it is easier to go to Jerusalem now. Why should we travel up to the north? When he understood this problem or the possible dilemma, he found out a means to solve it. And how? He built a shrine, a temple in the southern city of Bethel, and also in one of the northern cities of Dan. Thus we find, to compensate the only temple of Jerusalem, Jeroboam built two temples in Bethel and in Dan. Since they are built in rivalry to the temple of Jerusalem, we can see these temples are called the rival temples. Therefore, Jeroboam has begun to walk away from the commandments given by the Lord. There is only one temple, and that is in Jerusalem. But now he has made two temples in rivalry with the official temple of Jerusalem. Thus we see he has two temples. But now there should be also the need of the dedication. What is to be dedicated there in the new temple? In the temple of Jerusalem, there is the dedication, and the dedication is, of course, the Ark of the Covenant of God. The Ark of the Covenant, it symbolizes Yahweh's living presence or the abiding presence of Yahweh. But there is no other Ark of the Covenant. Hence, there is no other means to have a dedication in the new temples. And therefore he thought of and finally came to a conclusion. He made a golden calf, a calf made of gold, a statue, and put it in Bethel, in that sanctuary. And also another golden calf, and that was placed in the sanctuary of the temple in Dan. And then he taught the people, saying, these are the gods which that brought you out of the land of slavery, land of Egypt. And therefore, he was trying to teach the people, saying, this golden calf is the idol of Yahweh. Yahweh is the one who brought them out of Egypt. And therefore, now he told them it is Yahweh that is symbolized by this idol of the calf. Thus, Jeroboam is promoting the forbidden thing in Israel, idolatry. Golden calf is an idol of Yahweh according to him. And he taught the people saying this. And naturally, this phenomenon irritated and angered the pious Jews of Israel. They questioned their king, asking, how can you make an idol of Yahweh? It is forbidden. Then how can you do it? And then he gave them another explanation. And what is it? You have seen the throne of Yahweh in the temple of Jerusalem. There we find the angels, cherubim. They carry a throne, and the throne is empty. Nobody is sitting there. But the Jews believe Yahweh is seated on this throne, invisibly. Therefore, the throne is just a seat for Yahweh. And this is carried by the angels. And therefore, comparing the new situation to the old one, Jeroboam tried to explain to them in this way. Just as Yahweh is supposed to be seated invisibly in the throne, on the throne carried by the cherubim. Now you can think, Yahweh is seated on the golden calf invisibly. The golden calf is not the idol of Yahweh, but only it is the pedestal of Yahweh. Yahweh is seated on this. This interpretation was acceptable to some of the Jews in Israel, but some still resisted. But Jeroboam went forward with his new ideologies. Thus, there are new temples and new dedication. But in order to be a fully functioning temple, there should be ministers to do the ministry, the cult. And Jeroboam looked for the Levites. But there was not even a single Levite who wanted to do ministry in the rival temple. And then Jeroboam did something terrible. In a way we can say, he made the people of different tribes, not the Levites, the ministers or the priests of the temple. Anyone who wanted to be a priest was given permission, and they were taught to do the ministry in the new temples. And thus we find non-Levites are recruited to do the ministry in the temple of Bethel and Dan. And this was again against the commandment of Moses. Only Levites can do the cultic ministry, not anybody else. And therefore we see Jeroboam is going against the will of God here too. Okay, thus there is a temple, there is a dedication, and there is also the priest. And the temple is in full functioning. But still, whenever the feast came, the people as a crowd went to Jerusalem. And therefore, Jeroboam thought, here also should be the feast celebrated. And at the same time, when the feast is being celebrated in Jerusalem, here also the feast should be celebrated. Thus, parallel feast arose in the rival temples. And therefore we see Jeroboam began some new experiments or new ideologies, but all of them were practically leading the people away from the true faith. And that is what happened. Okay, it doesn't stop there. These 4 things that he did, it is called in the Bible the sin of Jeroboam, son of Nebat. And it did not stop there. It went still further. Following the model set by Jeroboam himself, the people began to make shrines on all hilltops or the high places. Thus were established, and people worship calf there, supposing it is the idol of Yahweh. Idolatry thus spread all over the country. But after some time, maybe 20-25 years, we see the early generation is already gone. A new generation has come up, and for them the calf stands for the idol of Baal, god Baal, and thus instead of Yahweh they began to worship Baal, the god of Canaanites, and thus Baal worship spread all over Judah after some 20-25 years of time, towards the end of the reign of Jeroboam, or after his death. And not only that, the idols kept in the temples, they also were misunderstood as the idols of Baal, and people began to worship Baal in all the temples, we can say. Thus, earlier it began with idolatry, but now it turns out to be apostasy. And all these come to be called as the sin of Jeroboam. Therefore, in conclusion, we can say the sin of Jeroboam would imply, first of all, 4 things which he did: the construction of the rival temples in Bethel and Dan, then the dedicating golden calf in the temple, appointing non-Levites as priests, and establishing parallel feast. As a continuation or consequence of this, people built the shrines on the hilltops, and after towards the end of the reign of Jeroboam or after his death, people as a whole began to worship Baal instead of Yahweh. Thus, the entire nation practically comes up, or they begin to worship Baal, or Baal worship spreads all over the nation. Okay, the rest of the consequences and other things done by Jeroboam, we will come to see in the next session. Thank you.
Almighty God, we thank you for inspiring us to read your scriptures and to meditate upon them day and night. Relying on all your promises, we humbly implore that the words of scripture may also be not just signs on a page, but channels of grace into our hearts. Amen.